I'm really sorry. It's been a long time coming, and I finally finished the manga, but here's the thing. I don't really have much to say about it. I feel like everything I could say would just end up being a rehash of my second video. Just stuff about how the manga made me care more about the characters and how it felt better paced overall. Here, I'll use this as an example. The Briggs arc was the worst part of Brotherhood for me. I don't know why, but it felt so boring and fucking sluggish. Maybe it has to do with the setting. A desolate, soulless fortress in the middle of a damn mountain where the most interesting thing to do is pick some stupid icicles off the ceiling. I don't think the show needed to dedicate as much time as it did to introducing the setting of the place and showing the mundane tasks assigned to the people there before going into the fight with Sloth. I don't know if it's because the manga did anything different in particular, but it feels like it goes by much faster than it does in the anime. At least in the manga, you control the pace at which the plot moves forward, and you're not forced to go at a certain speed. What everyone wants me to talk about the most is probably the ending of the manga. While it's not really that different from the anime, I ended up enjoying it a lot more. Now, did I hate the anime's ending? No, but I didn't love it either. A lot of people say it's like the perfect ending, but it's really just a standard happy ending to me, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if it doesn't feel earned, then it comes off as cheesy and really lackluster. Thank God this is the last time I'm gonna say this, probably because it feels like I just say this every time I talk about FMA.
Speeding through this part
I'm saying that those moments are
very studio intentionally
because of that
had
rush beginning
But because the manga dedicated time to setting up the plot, its characters, and their backstories, the ending is a lot more likable, to me at least. Especially since the manga went into detail about the Ishvalan War, which actually highlights the struggles and shitty terrible things that the military and by extension, all of Amestris had to go through, because of this one fart in a jar. I guess I'd say the ending feels a lot more complete, although there were still some flaws like Envy's death scene. Even in the manga, it felt like it came out of nowhere and it didn't really fit the character. It also feels like Ed just loses all of his personality when he's analyzing Envy, but at least it doesn't overstay its welcome. Despite those flaws, I did find myself enjoying it, and I think it was a good experience. That's pretty much what I felt about the final act of the manga in general. Like, there were still some parts that I didn't like, Envy's death scene again being one of them, but for the most part, all I felt while I was nearing the end of the story, for the second time, was a sense of satisfaction. Though there are some specific parts that I'd like to talk about, this video will mostly be delving into any residual thoughts that I had on the other two variations of the story. An interesting place to start would be Ed. As he is the protagonist, I thought it would be interesting to say something that I've thought about him for a while. He really isn't that smart in Brotherhood, and to a lesser extent in the manga. Although I do think that manga Ed has personality, I don't think he really had much to offer when it came to something that he's become pretty well known for. His intelligence, if you couldn't tell, that's what I was talking about. It really does feel as though the only reason why he's special is because he performed human transmutation, and through that gained the ability to use alchemy without the use of a circle. And even then, he's not that great. Al also had that ability after a certain point in the story. Izumi could do the same, and even characters who haven't seen the Door of Truth like Mustang and Kimberly can utilize different forms of alchemy without having to draw anything. The thing that set Ed apart from the rest of the alchemists in 2003 was that he was genuinely clever. He didn't just memorize the table of elements and call it a day. He was good at analyzing information, using his opponent's fighting styles against them. Combine that with what he picked up from a few books, and you have a pretty damn good fighter in this world. One of my personal favorite moments from 03 is just this really small bit where Ed kept fixing up his automail with different metals so that Scar wouldn't know what it was made of, therefore meaning that he couldn't destroy it because the process of deconstruction requires knowledge of the material and whatever. It was some pretty smart shit. It never feels like Brotherhood Ed really thinks anything through. He gets thrown into situations so often that the solutions he comes up with to fix his problems feel really spontaneous, and I know he's also meant to be rash, but he can have two different characteristics at the same time. It's not like he has to be just one. The only times where he does something that's supposed to be considered clever feels really forced. Arguably, his biggest brain moment was when he found out that there was a giant transmutation circle being drawn around Amestris. He found out by seeing a tunnel that Sloth was digging under Briggs, and based off of this tunnel, he came to the conclusion that it was in the shape of a circle. He knew this because in alchemy, circles are the symbols of power or whatever, but why would he correlate a random tunnel he found being dug by a homunculus to alchemy in the first place? It could be because of his mating with Father, who used alchemy, but it seems seems like a pretty big assumption to make on such a loose connection. So you're left wondering, how'd he come up with this? Well, because the writer told him about it. Some of the fights that Ed takes part in makes it feel like he only gets by because of the people who help him out. For example, in his fight against Kimberly, he only gets the upper hand because of his new automail. Same as in the fight against Pride later on, though there is a moment where Ed shuts off all the lights in the town nearby, depriving Pride of his shadow powers. However, this also hinders him, and in the end, he has to be saved by Hohenheim and Al. It just makes Ed feel a lot less competent than what people might tell you. Another example of that could be found in his fight against Greed. Pretty much the entire fight, Ed is getting pummeled, beaten, and then he finally finds his weakness, and then Izumi interrupts and saves the day. And then Greed just leaves without Ed even being able to do anything. Brotherhood never really gives Ed a chance to flex his muscles, to demonstrate that he is indeed a smart character who can not only find enemy weaknesses, but also take advantage of those weaknesses. At least in the manga, when Ed fights Greed, he does it alone, and it doesn't feel like he has to be saved by the soldiers who interrupt the fight. And in 2003, Ed just straight up kills him. Speaking of which, that fight in 2003 is, in my opinion, the greatest fight in all of FMA. Like, still to this day, I go back to watch that sequence because it has such amazing build-up, animation, pacing, and it ends in such a satisfying, punchy way that syncs up with the music perfectly. It has a really good structure too. There's a bit at the beginning where Ed's losing, then there's the turning point, followed by a bit of breathing room that gives the exposition of the fight scene, and then once the music swells, just no wasting time, no talking, just all action and...
Oh yeah.
Now that I talk about that fight, a lot of people point to Greed's death in this version when talking about how dark 03 was, which brings me to a comment that I've actually gotten a lot on my videos. A lot of people, when talking about 2003 and why they love it more than Brotherhood, they talk about how much darker it is, which, while true, it is darker than Brotherhood, that isn't a reason to say it's better. What really matters is purpose. Is there a reason for this anime to be depressing as fuck? A pretty interesting interpretation of FMA 2003, which I personally agree with, comes from Amio's video on FMA 2003. I recommend giving this video a watch because it brings up some interesting points and interpretations of 03. Link will be in description below. But basically, one of the points that he makes is that 03 is dark because it tries to portray life in a realistic way. The main message of 03, from what I can tell, is that life kind of sucks. It's not a fairy tale. The idea of equivalent exchange isn't just a law of alchemy for the anime, it's an incorrect philosophy to live by. The idea that giving something up will always result in something that you want is flawed. Sometimes, if you put in a lot of effort into something, things just won't work out the way you want, because that's just life sometimes. Mustang tries his hardest to avenge Hughes, yet he never gets a chance to directly confront his killer. In fact, Envy doesn't even die for what he did. Lust wants to change herself, she wants to become human again, but she dies before she can fully redeem herself. Wrath pretty much loses everything, the limbs that he thought would make him human, and both of his mothers. That's basically the whole point of Dante's monologue towards Ed at the end. But even though your struggles feel pointless, there is always a silver lining. You do still get something out of it, which is what Ed's last transmutation symbolizes. Even though he went through hell to do it, he still accomplished his goal. He got Al's body back. Although what he got wasn't perfect, it does have a hopeful connotation to it, and there's something comforting about knowing that. The show ends up saying something pretty meaningful about life, and yeah, there's a ton of messed up shit in conveying the message, but you can't chalk up everything it does to its darker tone. Besides, 2003 has its fair share of humor, which oftentimes is much better and more fun to watch than Brotherhood. It's a lot smarter with how it delivers its punchlines, and it also doesn't seem to only use the same joke every time. For example, the short gag, 2003 actually changes how Ed reacts to people calling him short in different situations.
Sleep tight, pipsqueak.
Who are you calling a pipsqueak? You know I'd be tall too in heels.
And at a certain point, instead of freaking out about it, he just becomes depressed because he's so used to it at this point. I think the manga also does a pretty good job with its humor because as a manga, it uses its medium as the delivery of some of its jokes. And with Brotherhood, well, You already know how I feel about that. Okay, I shit on Brotherhood a lot, but here's something that you wouldn't guess. I actually really like a character in Brotherhood, and he may not be who you think. I think Ling was the most entertaining and fun character in that anime. His introduction was actually fucking hilarious, plus he just added a lot of energy and personality that was sorely lacking from the show. The reason why I like him so much may be tied to the fact that his voice actor in the English dub is Todd Haberkorn, and I'm a pretty big fan of him. But he genuinely sounds like he was having a good time while voicing his lines, and whenever Ling is on screen, he just brings that really fun energy to the show, and I just can't help but smile whenever I see him. I'm not even gonna lie. Anyways, that's all I really have on my mind at the moment. If you guys have any suggestions about FMA related topics to talk about, maybe specific scenes, asking what my thoughts on that were, you can always leave it in the comments below. I'd be happy to talk about my opinion on that in a future video. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll be going now.